As a biologist, you can be a microbiologist and study the small parts of the living world like the cell and genetics and the prokaryotes. Or you can be a macrobiologist and study the large parts of the living world like the plants and the animals. If you study how those organisms relate to each other and to their environment, you are studying ecology. If you are studying a single group of organisms, like a flock of crows or a herd of zebras, you're studying population ecology, and that's what we'll be covering in this chapter. To understand ecology, you have to begin by understanding the environment. As you know, the environment has a wide range, from very hot climates to very cold climates, very dry deserts to very wet rainforests. Those conditions determine the plants and the animals that are found in a particular area. All life begins with plants. Since they are the bottom of the food pyramid and they provide the food for the entire food web, the amount of sunlight and the quality of the soil is essential in creating a strong climate for the animals. The amount of water that's present at any given time and how often the rain falls also becomes very important, both to the plants and to the animals. When you add temperature into the mix, you have all of the conditions that are necessary to make a climate or a habitat that's filled with life or rather barren. If you understand the non-living or the abiotic part of a particular habitat, then you better understand the biotic or the living part of that habitat as well. The environment changes all the time, from morning to evening, from summer to winter, and the animals that live there have to be able to change as well. Those changes can be short-term or long-term. Short-term is an immediate response. It's something that makes the animal change for that moment. So for example, when you get hot, you sweat. When your dog gets hot, he pants. That's an immediate response to help the body cool down. Long-term responses are tied to adaptations. They occur over a long period of time and are the result of evolution. They can be physiological, which are the functions of the inside of the body. So for example, aquatic organisms that live in the very deep ocean or very cold waters have created a chemical in their blood that acts like antifreeze and keeps their cells from freezing. Morphological changes are changes of structure. So for example, birds have hollow bones rather than bones filled with marrow. This allows them to have bones that are strong but light so that they're able to fly. And then there are all sorts of behavioral responses, such as rabbits that hibernate in the winter, or herds of wildebeest that migrate following the summer rains. When a biologist is talking about an organism or a population's range, they're talking about the area where it can be found. It not only includes where the individuals sleep, but how far they roam as they search for food or for mates. Plants also have a range. This is the extremes of their habitat, the coldest that they can get to the hottest they can get, or the driest to the wettest. How those individuals are spaced within the range can tell us more about the structure of the population and the needs of the population. There are three different types of spacing: random, uniform, and clumped. Random spacing is just like it sounds. There's no pattern to where organisms are found in their range. If it's an animal, they're not tied to a burrow or to a water hole. They travel all throughout their range using the resources as they find them. Plants are dispersed randomly through their range by wind and water, or through the droppings of birds and animals that have eaten the fruit. Clump spacing is the exact opposite. You'll find the organisms tied to a particular part of their range. because of some sort of limited resource. So you'll find plants around the only open source of water, or you'll find animals around the only shade tree. You'll also find them together for social reasons. You'll see fish, like in the picture, schooling together to protect themselves from predators, or birds that flock together for social interactions, protection, or for mating. Uniform spacing is usually caused by limited resources. Those limited resources create competition. To avoid competition, many organisms have adapted and created a behavioral response. So for example, you have a stretch of beach that male seals will protect so that they can provide food for their females. If you look down on the beach, you will see the seals and their females evenly spaced along the beach. Plants do this as well. If you look underneath a pine tree, very rarely will you see any other plants growing. That's because the tannins in the needles are actually poisons that kill any kind of invading plant life. It even includes the tree's own seedlings. This keeps them from having to share those resources. Again, if you look down from above, you'll see the pine trees evenly spaced. Another way for you to learn about a population and how it interacts with its environment is to look at its overall survivorship. When we're looking at survivorship, we're really looking at how many individuals survive to old age and actually die of natural causes. This information is shown on a survivorship curve, and there are 3 survivorship curves: 1, 2, and 3. This graph shows all 3 survivorship curves on the same axis. We have the number of individuals surviving up to 100% on the y-axis and the lifespan on the x-axis. The type 1 curve, these species have a low death rate for the young, and the death rate remains low through most of their middle age, but death rate increases sharply in old age. The example I have are humans. Humans and all other organisms that are type 1 survivorship species care for the young and reproduce relatively late in life. The type 2 survivorship curve species have a relatively constant death rate throughout their lives. Death could come from being hunted, through disease, or through accidents. An example would be a squirrel or a reptile. Survivorship type 3 species have many young, hundreds or thousands, most of which die early in their life because the adults provide very little to no care for their young. This would be plants, fish, oysters, insects. Another way that biologists look at populations is to see what their overall population growth rate is, and they begin by looking at their biotic potential. This is what a species could do if there were no environmental limitations. So how fast could a population grow? How many babies could an individual make if there was no limit on the amount of food, the amount of water, the amount of space? There were no predators. Everything was absolutely perfect. If a species is actually experiencing and using their full biotic potential, you get exponential growth, or a population explosion. The reason it's exponential is purely because of numbers. If you have every adult producing at the maximum possible, the next generation has the maximum number of babies. Those will also produce at the maximum capability of their bodies, and the numbers just get larger and larger and larger. This very rarely happens, or it happens for a very limited amount of time, because all environments have some sort of limit. At some point they run out of food or water or space, or predators begin to notice them. All of those factors then bring that population back under control. There is a mathematical formula that can be used to calculate population growth. We're going to do these calculations in class. but I want you to see the formula. So we'll go over those quickly, and then, as I said, we'll talk about them in class. dN over dt is rate of growth. What that means is the change in number of individuals over the change in time. The little d means change. So in other words, I had 50 individuals on day 1, and I have 100 individuals 1 month later. R is the overall rate of increase. This is usually some function of biotic potential. The number of individuals is literally how many individuals there are at the moment that this was calculated, and K is carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that the environment can support. This is a graph of the two different types of growth curves. The red line represents exponential growth. As you see, it begins slowly when the numbers are small, and then when the numbers reach a critical mass, it shoots up way over carrying capacity. This is basically biotic potential. What will happen is, now that the population is over carrying capacity, the individuals will begin to starve and will drop back below carrying capacity again. The other is a slow, gradual increase. The population's growth is slower. Once it reaches close to carrying capacity, it begins to even out. That straight line, though, isn't exactly correct. It's misleading, because in reality, nothing can be exactly at carrying capacity. This group goes a little bit above, and then just like the exponential group, will starve back and drop a little bit below, and then go up and down and up and down. So that straight line is actually an average. As I said in the previous slide, populations that exceed what the habitat can support will be regulated. That's called negative regulation. They bring the population size down. It can be density dependent or density independent. You already know density independent as a form of genetic drift. These are natural disasters that the population can't control and occur whether the population size is large or small. Density dependent, however, are things that make the population smaller and occur specifically because the population has gotten too large. For example, we have increased intraspecific competition. That's competition between members of the same species for resources. So there'll be more fighting for food or for water or for shelter. You have the increased possibility of disease. When populations are large and individuals are closer together, disease spreads much more quickly. You have the entire problem of crowding in and of itself. If you have increased crowding, behavior changes. Individuals become more aggressive. They attack each other for no reason or for very little reason. Some individuals will even suddenly migrate, like insects. They'll change form and fly away. And then you have predation. Predation actually increases when population size grows, because population triggers the predators. They see a group that they didn't see before. All of these things will negatively impact growth and make the population size actually get smaller. The last factor that we'll talk about that regulates population is the actual cost of reproduction. Making a baby, whether it's an actual baby born like a kitten or an egg, costs the adults energy. It costs the female energy to produce that baby, and it costs the adults energy to actually care for that baby. If the resources are limited and the adults have to spend a lot of physical energy to make the offspring or to care for it, fewer offspring are made. In reverse, if resources are abundant, that energy cost is low and more babies are made. How those resources are available will affect what is called a life history adaptation, whether a species is an R or a K selected species. Biologists have organized living organisms into two types of populations based on their reproductive rates. They have what are called opportunist or R-selected species, or competitor or K-selected species. R-selected species are for rate of growth, usually are based on biotic potential. They call them opportunist because they take advantage of changes in resources very quickly. K-selected species are based on carrying capacity. They're competitor species because they actually thrive in environments where their population is closer to carrying capacity. R-selected species have a short lifespan. There's a short time span between when they are young and when they become reproducing adults. They're able to breed at a young age. They produce many offspring per breeding season, and they will reproduce many times over their lifetime. Their newborns are small. There is little to no parental care. There is usually either a high mortality rate for the young, in which case it is a species with a type 3 survivorship curve, or there is a high mortality rate for all ages, which means they are a survivorship 2 curve. The K-selected species are the exact opposite of the R-selected species and are a type 1 survivorship curve. Biologists will often put the information that they have gathered through calculating population growth and by putting the information that they have gathered by observing populations on a population pyramid. Population pyramids are divided in half, with male on one side and female on the other, and then it's divided into individual bars showing age. This particular graph is for humans, but can be used for any type of organism. A population pyramid with a wide base and a small point shows a population that is growing. That's because there are more adults at breeding age than there are that will actually be dying. If you have a declining population, the base is smaller than the middle or the top. This shows that you have fewer individuals that are or will be reproducing than are passing away. If you look at a stable population, the base, the middle, and the top are approximately the same size. This shows that the number of individuals that are producing are equal to the number of individuals that are passing away. We'll be looking at some more population pyramids in class. This is the end of the population ecology chapter.